Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3H's of the channel. And in this video, I don't even know what to really title it. Every story is just scary as hell. So, if that sounds like something that you'd like, pull up a stump and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I had something that scared the hell out of me happen in the early fall of 2015. So, at the time I was living in West LA, but occasionally I would go to parties in the valley. I was driving down the street. It was around 3 a.m. This was during the time I was coming back or going to one of these parties. The street was deserted, and it has a lot of trees, so the sidewalk is very dark. I stopped at a red light. I see a girl in the corner. She's wearing a miniskirt. She looks like that she's contemplating the horizon, but she has a blank stare on her face. I think that it's probably a hooker, and she's likely high. I think nothing of this. So I'm just sitting there in my car. I reach down and check my phone while I'm waiting for the green light. And then I see a shadow at the corner of my eye. I jump and drop my phone, startled. She's standing at the passenger side of the car. I'm alone, by the way. I look at her, and I notice something very wrong. Her mouth. Her facial expression is like she is surprised, but too surprised. Her mouth is way too open, like abnormally open, not like somebody had a broken jaw, or somebody was double jointed and can open their mouth a long ways. It was a kind of, that person is not a person, it's not human. She looks at me. I look at her. She goes for the door and tries to open it. I kick it into first gear and floor it. I look in the mirror. She starts running really fast, chasing me. She runs so fast that she catches my car for something like 2 blocks. Before, she didn't slow down. She just suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. After this, I said screw whatever I was going to do. And then I ran all the red lights to my sister's house, and I slept there until morning. My father told me many stories about witches, ghosts, magic, and other spooky stuff that happens. My father and my uncle lived in the middle of the Danube Delta in a little village that's now almost completely depopulated. These type of stories used to happen during the 60s up to the 70s, and most stories are corroborated by his brother and my grandparents that also lived there. I'll talk first about the witches. This village had 2 witches, a good witch and a bad witch. The 2 of them did not interact at all with one another. The bad witch lived alone in her home at the end of the village and was well respected and feared. Her house and yard were clean as a whistle, but nobody ever cleaned it. Villagers would pass by her street, only walking with their backs to her house. Some would leave her food, water, and everything she would need weekly. In turn, she would mind her own business mostly, and rarely would leave her house, and when she did, every villager would go into their houses or the church and pray. She had this pet ferret that was fully black, and was much, much larger than normal. My father told me that those that wanted to see her or talk to her must first go in front of her house, prostrate themselves, keeping their eyes on the ground. Then she would walk out and talk to the person that needed her, quotes, help. One time, after a wedding, a group of drunk guests from another town started to throw rocks. They made a mess, broke a few windows, peed on the fence. Dumb stuff that people do when they're belligerently drunk. Just then, a grueling screech was heard, and one of them died on the spot, while the others peed their pants and ran away, mumbling like madmen. And it didn't stop there. A day later, none of them could speak. In fact, they never spoke again. It was as if that they were mute from birth, but one of them wrote out on paper that he has nothing else to say to the world, and that his silence was well deserved. And as for the man that died, His face was eaten by her ferret. The good witch, however, was an active member of the community and was sought after by many people, some even from faraway villages. She dealt with all manner of curses, hexes, herbal remedies, and the like, but also with demonic possessions, blessings, etc. Sometimes on a full moon, the entire town would go out with lanterns into the nearby forest to find herbs. Hundreds of people would go in the middle of the night to find herbs, but only specific ones that she instructed. After a few hours, all the people would return in the middle of the village and give her the herbs. She would burn some in front of the church, and others would be dried and made as potions. One time, my uncle and his grandfather took the boat and transported the witch to a nearby village. In that village, a young woman was said to be possessed. She would speak demonic tongues and was gagged and immobilized by some villagemen for 2 days straight, apparently working in shifts to try and keep the woman safe and from hurting herself. For 2 full days, she was held until the witch came. When she did, she asked the members of her family for their biggest, baddest, meanest goat. When they brought the goat in front of the 2 women, the goat started to act just like the young woman, seemingly mad. Then she asked everybody in the house to leave, and she did her stuff. After around 2 hours later, the witch leaves the house with a now quiet, obedient goat following her. She takes the goat near the water and drowns it. The goat did not fight it at all. The young woman was now completely normal. After the communists came into power, they made a concentration camp in a nearby town. The convoys of prisoners would pass through the village to the camp, and from the camp they would come with bodies to be buried. Some people would try to escape, only to be shot immediately. Hundreds, if not thousands of people were killed and buried in the area. Some people would claim they would hear the cries of the dead, and they would hear the sound of the carriages and the horse that took him to the camp. One early morning, there were found 3 bodies in the middle of the street. The bodies were putrefied and dirty, and they were sun-bleached. But how could they be sunburned if the sun was just rising? Some people claimed they were moroi. The village priest and some villagers go to the communal grave. They return white as a sheet and are visibly disturbed. The bodies are taken to the church, and an ad hoc ceremony takes place. They are buried properly, and their graves are caged. Fishermen would sometimes go missing. This was not considered unusual, but in a very small period of time, a very large amount of men would disappear. The Danube is calm, and the fishermen were all experienced. Their boats would be found adrift with their haul of fish intact, so there's no way that it will be thieves that kill people and dump the bodies into the river. This keeps going on for a while. About 15 people are missing at this point. Their wives are not that upset about it. An old man says that the spirits are called Sanzien and are at fault, and that they can only be talked to on the day of St. John the Baptist. He says that if you put water in your ears and you hear your ears ringing weirdly, evil spirits live in the water. He warns the fishermen not to go alone at night and to put water in their ears and check if there are evil spirits around. The day of St. John the Baptist comes, and he decides to talk with the Sanzien. He takes his boat and goes together with his son, but tells him to never talk, to not open his eyes, and pray the entire time. They wait a long time, but eventually he sees figures resembling women dressed in a simple white garb. He speaks with them and pleads with them to leave the fishermen alone. They tell him that those men died were treating their wives badly, and the wives came together and wanted those people gone. The old man is spared because he was kind to his wife, and that his son was proof of that. The spirits leave. There are many other stories that I could tell, but they're not super interesting like these 2. Things like animals behaving weirdly, cows not making milk because of some petty curse, children having weird birthmarks, but those are for another time. This isn't my story, but it's my stepdad's, and it's one that he loves to tell me every Halloween. So at the time of this, he was 17 years old. It was 1978, and he was growing up in rural Tennessee. Some of his favorite things to do were hiking, hunting, fishing, some real outdoorsman stuff. One day, he and a friend of his, whose nickname was Billy, were fixing to do a weekend-long camping trip in some woods a few miles from their homes. They left their bikes by the opening to a trail and just hauled their equipment in by themselves. They set up camp after a while, finding a nearby river to possibly fish from. As they set up camp together and started a fire, Billy asks who is now my stepdad to have a listen around. Apparently for the last few hours, there hadn't been any kind of noise, not even insects. But my dad chalks it up to their presence, saying that we are the predators. My stepdad and Billy spend Friday night alone in the woods, eating food that's cooked over the fire, just talking about girls and usual stuff that teenagers in the 70s would talk about and do. Around 1 a.m., my stepdad is in the tent that they had set up earlier in the day when he hears what he knows for sure is a person. He keeps listening intently, wondering what this person is doing, but he still tries to act like he's asleep, in case it's some kind of serial killer or backwoods weirdo. My stepdad hears, "Hey Danny," in a very concerned tone of voice, almost scared even. My stepdad has no clue who Danny even is. Danny, this voice apparently cries out in desperation again. The strange guy who's looking for Danny eventually wanders off after a few seconds or so. My stepdad tries to sleep, but struggles, thinking that someone might be lost, or worse. The next morning eventually comes, and he talks Billy into seeing if they could try and look for the stranger and his friend Danny. Billy agrees, and they head off into the woods. Billy tells my stepdad that he's still yet to hear any animal noises, which my stepdad shrugs off again. As they continue trekking through the woods and looking for lost strangers, my stepdad asked Billy to not split up, as that's dangerously stupid, but cover more ground by maybe distancing themselves. Billy agrees to this, and they separate by 10 feet, maybe a little more. So they separate. My stepdad goes deeper into some more woodland to search. He keeps sight of Billy, and they frequently called out to each other to make sure that they're still in reach. My stepdad keeps walking alone in the woodland looking for any signs of people having been there recently. He's keeping track of any footprints or any other signs of any human presence. He calls out to Billy, but then doesn't hear back. He sits there for what he guessed was 10 to 15 minutes, calling out for Billy. "Billy, where are you? Billy." He stops when he hears someone else calling Billy's name. The other voice calling out Billy's name scares him. He looks around, checking his surroundings, and then he sees someone sitting up in a tree. This person is calling out Billy's name, and as he describes them, had somehow been up there this entire time, and he had no idea how he hadn't spotted him. The person is some shade of deathly pale, wearing almost nothing, covered in lesions and open bloody sores, and what looked like pus dripping from open scab-like markings. My stepdad nervously backs away before the strange guy just drops, lands perfectly on the ground, and flashes him this very wide, unnatural smile. "Billy, Billy." He describes the creepy guy's voice as what it would sound like if the Wizard of Oz had taken a can opener to his vocal cords. The creepy guy catches up with my stepdad. Somehow he never fully figured out how he'd managed to be face to face with him so quickly. The creepy guy then proceeds to cup my stepdad's face into his hands with that smile still on his face. "Back off," my stepdad yells at him before running from him. My stepdad collides into Billy as soon after and tells him what happened. They see the creepy guy just standing there with this smile. They begin to run for it. Somehow, the creepy guy is keeping up with them, really catching up to them. They decide to do the brightest thing imaginable and jump into the river. After jumping in, they relax and just let the current take them away from this guy. The creepy guy is still running parallel to them and cackling. Eventually, they do lose sight of him. My stepdad and Billy just let the current take them out for a while before swimming back to the riverbank. By then, it's almost dusk. They reach a small campground area and climb out of the river. They ask one of the campers where they are and if he can give them a ride home. Apparently the distance that they traveled by river, they were 2 towns over from where they started. Neither of them ever see this guy ever again. He's still an outdoorsman, but he keeps a shotgun on him from then on. So my buddy is a Native American, and he's told me some pretty wild stories, and he gave the okay to tell one that happened to his late grandfather. I couldn't tell you how many years ago this was, but let's start. So, my friend's grandfather was living on a reservation. He was an active hunter and a very active participant in the local religion and folklore. He took the supernatural very seriously, and by the time of this, winter had finally come. It was 23 degrees Fahrenheit on this particular day. Light snow was coming down while he was moving through private land that was owned by the res. He was hunting alone because he considered hunting with people to be a distraction. His words, not mine. His route was to walk through a man-made dirt road and then take an offbeat trail, moving off the road for maybe 4 miles. After that, he would go up into his man-made tree stand. It was literally just 4 planks of wood held up by supports and a rope that's attached to the tree. But you do what you gotta do. So he's making his way to this. He's been walking for maybe 2.25 miles. And this feeling starts to grow in his gut. The feeling of unrest or dread of the surroundings. He's not paranoid, but he's getting cautious. He begins to slow down his pace as he's getting closer and closer to his stand. The feeling has started to steadily grow. He noticed that even with how quiet the winter woods can be, this time it felt different, empty. They had a word for it, but I don't remember what it was, but it meant abandoned. This really unnerves his grandfather. After finally making it to his stand, he just climbs the rope, no ladder, just like the Chad he was. He sits on the boards and loads the rifle. He feels a little safer now, like he can breathe, now that his rifle is at the ready. He sits there for hours, I think. And then this smell starts to raise its head all around him. It smells like dead animals. The smell is moving in a circle, like the smell will rise in severity and then just go away and then repeat. He's getting really fed up with the smell. He slowly starts to see little bits of movement, just here and there. Off a few yards into the forest, he sees deer antlers. He gets excited. He pulls out the deer antlers to rattle the buck in. He rattles loud enough to reach the buck. The buck raises its head from behind fallen trees and forest debris. He's getting really excited now. He keeps rattling. The buck moves up more. But then, his grandfather gets very confused. The The deer's neck is really long. It keeps rising and moving out of the brush, and then the deer stands up. It's on its hind legs, and its forearms end not with hooves, but humanistic hands. It takes 2 large steps, stepping over the debris and fallen trees. His grandfather automatically knows what this is. As he thinks about it, the creature sheds its fur and the flesh falls away, revealing a dark gray skin covered in dried blood with rotting flesh hanging off of its body. It's very emaciated and bony. Its head loses its deer-like exterior and reveals a skull with broken antlers on it. The skull has very tight skin that almost seems like it's wrapped around it. The lower jaw looks like a human's, but when opened, the lower jaw splits and looks like something straight out of the Predator. It finally opens its eyes, a dull yellow glaze coming from the abysses on its face. There's blood dripping onto the snow, causing steam to come off of the blood. When it walks, its bones are cracking and snapping, and simultaneously it seems to be healing the bones, like the bones are moving inside of its leg. Its stomach is stretched and somewhat bloated, like a beer gut, but covered in blood, spots, and undulating. The creature begins kind of investigating the area that his grandfather rattled to lure it near. The skin of the deer lays on the snow. It looks like a fur pelt that hasn't been skinned and readied yet. It crinkly walks around all jagged, just kind of meandering around, smelling the air. The smell is nose-meltingly strong. His grandfather has to cover his face with his shirt, but even then, it seeps through. The creature eventually kind of just wanders away. After sitting for a while longer, he decides that it's most likely time to leave and get the hell out of there. He keeps moving through the snow. The snow is finally picking up, and almost a full-on blizzard. He's been out there for maybe about 8 hours. The sun is going down fast. He speeds up and is lightly jogging, and then trips over something. He gets up out of the snow to see just what tripped him. It's a frozen body, a young hunter that had been missing for weeks before with another guy. This terrifies him, and he speeds up even more. He theorizes that he has half a mile until his truck. He finally makes it to the truck and takes off. He makes it back to the reservation. The res police were literally about to leave and search for him. He tells them and his elder what happened. He gets a chant or something put on him to protect his soul. His grandfather never told anyone else. The only reason why he told my friend is because his grandfather and my friend got really drunk one night all these years later, and he spilled the story. So in my opinion, all of those were pretty terrifying. But what did you think? If there was one that stuck out to you, let me know which one it was down in the comments. If you have one of your own or would like to donate to the channel, there are links in the description below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. And with that, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching, and have a good week.